Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Once again, I'm not sure, we're day 3 of the Drastic Summit, and I think we might even be near the tail end of the event. So I'm sure that you've all heard that introduction for a lot of these presentations, and it's awesome because that means that we have so many people attending live from around the world. So I am pleased to be here today. I'm Lynette Kiowski. I'm the managing partner with Reach Canada. And I'm pleased to be moderating this conversation with this group of extremely diverse and successful women from around the world on a topic that I think is dear to all of us, and that's really around women building empires, which I love because it really conveys sort of that notion that, you know, women are sort of at the fore of building really amazing empires, not just from that physical real estate built environment, but empires in terms of community, collectiveness, and, you know, all of the amazing components that go into the built environment. So joining us here today, and I'm just going to provide a very brief introduction of each of our panelists, and then really spend the time hearing from them. We have Elizabeth Nelson joining us from the Netherlands today. Elizabeth is the co-founder and the head of innovation and living labs at Smart Building Certification. So welcome, Elizabeth. We have Rosanna Lawn joining us from London. Am I correct in that, Rosanna? Are you in London today?
Yeah,
wow.
Sunny,
So we have
rainy London.
rainy London today. So thank you both for joining us later in your day. So Rosanna is the Brand and Strategic Partnerships Director with Project Utopia, as well as the co-founder of Creation Property Network. So excited to hear from Rosanna today. For those of you that visit her LinkedIn profile, you'll see that she has a number of accolades there. And so I'm extremely excited to hear from Rosanna and her depth of experience. We have Karen Lau joining us from Toronto. So Karen is co-founder and CTO and chief design lead of Furnisher, which is a technology startup out of the Toronto area around designing spaces. So welcome, Karen. We have Monica. Oh, I'm gonna say it wrong.
Eurosonic.
Eurosonic, thank you. I knew it was a Euro something. It was your something. That's what I remembered. Eurosonic. My apologies, Monica. Monica's the CEO and co-founder at Ratio City in Toronto around land acquisition, and she has been a prominent person in the real estate space for a number of years in Toronto. So welcome, Monica. And finally, we have Maria Yoma joining us from Buenos Aires this morning. It's morning where you are, Maria? Yes. Okay.
It's just 1 hour difference.
Oh, it's just an hour difference. Okay. Well, I guess it depends where you are, but welcome, Maria. Maria is the founder and CEO of Elevator Ventures. And so excited to hear a little bit more about Elevator as we move through. So just to kick us off, I just thought I would, you know, sort of set the stage a little bit with some statistics that I've accumulated, but also borrowed from a previous panel that I participated in earlier today. And it's really around kind of, you know, it's always interesting to look at the numbers. And I think on our preparation call, one of you said it so eloquently, the numbers don't lie. It doesn't matter what gender, what race, what, you know, where you are on the diversity scale, a number is a number. And so what's interesting about these numbers is, you know, one thing that I found interesting was 80% of, you know, global mid-market size companies have at least one woman in a senior management role. But really the proportion of women versus men in senior management roles is really only 29%. So it's great that we're seeing a higher number of companies encouraging and bringing women into those roles, but there is still sort of a lack of equality in terms of how the number of those roles. With respect to events like Drastic and others of similar ilk around technology specifically, you know, some of the trends is we're only seeing, like, you know, 1 in 4 speakers women, only 14% of keynotes at tech conferences like this are women of color. And I know, and I shouldn't say conferences like this. I should say tech type conferences, because Drastic has done an extremely great job of bringing in a diverse number of keynotes. And I've been blown away by the caliber and quality of people that they've brought to this event, which I'm hoping will be one of the pivotal events on this stage. And again, 3-to-1 men outnumber women in media coverage. And I just wanted to set the stage there, because this panel is all around women building empires. And it's a little bit, this group, I think, is really challenging some of those numbers and those norms. And so that's kind of the place that I'd love to kick the conversation around. So the first thing I'd love to do is have each of you maybe just quickly introduce yourselves and talk about the empire that you are already participating in, building, driving forward. So let's start at the top. Elizabeth, I'll toss it over to you. I'd love to hear a little bit more around smart building certification and what you're doing there.
Yeah. Well, if you had asked me, at the beginning of my career, if this is where I would be, it definitely probably wouldn't have been on my mind. I started off in advertising and was a researcher. I'm still a researcher today, but had an amazing career at a fantastic ad agency, and kind of threw myself into it, really started burning the midnight oil, and then slept through the more painful part of a bikini wax and realized I'd burned out from the job that I loved. So I started researching how we can change our environments, how we can change the way that we work. And that led to my PhD with the different departments of biomedical engineering, psychology, and business, working together with CBRE, a giant in the real estate world, kind of putting together, can we create a better space? And since then, we've done amazing big projects from there. And that's where smart building certification came too, because we knew that there was going to be one coming. And we said, what is it going to be? It's going to be a checklist of technologies and buildings that aren't maybe better, because could we have the smartest building in the world that's not actually the best building in the world? And wouldn't that be a shame? So can we use this to really push buildings? And we did a soft launch this year. We're officially launching next year, but we already have buildings on every continent. We have an amazing following. Our network is de-siloing an industry that is so siloed, and we're bringing a ton of thought leadership to it, and it's growing incredibly, incredibly fast. So we're very lucky.
Amazing, amazing. Well, kudos to you, and I can't wait to see the trajectory of it as it evolves. Thank you. Rosanna Lawn from London, would love to hear a little bit more about Project Utopia and Creation Property Network.
Yeah, great. So they're both passions of mine personally, which is incredible, because when you do what you're passionate about, it just makes it so much more worthwhile. So Creation Property Network was set up when I was a graduate at Cushman & Wakefield. So I was on their graduate scheme doing my MRICS actually. And I was getting really frustrated by the lack of opportunity for young people in the industry to meet each other and to network. And me and my friend, we were trying to find events and we couldn't find anything. And in the end, we just went, you know what, let's just set up a network. Let's create this community, this environment that gives access to young professionals in the property industry, often the people that are kind of forgotten about. They're not really part of the company until they qualify, all this kind of lark, especially in corporate companies. So we set up Creation Property Network. We now have 4 active locations around the UK. We have about 30 volunteers who run it. We're sponsored by the likes of CBRE, Knight Frank, British Land, DLA Piper, through annual sponsorship, which allows us to put on events for young professionals so they can meet each other. We get expert speakers down to come and talk about really interesting topical kind of conversation that I suppose young professionals don't usually get access to, because they don't really have the money to go to events, or their companies don't sponsor them going to the events. And we also partner with the likes of companies like BizNow and MIPIM, and we get competition tickets to be able to send some of our young professionals to these major industry leading events as well that they'd never get access to. And last year at MIPIM UK, we actually curated a panel just of creation, some creation members, and also some people like the CEO of the British Property Federation, and they spoke, and they were able to kind of get their voice out there and get in front of people. So we really do it for the passion of kind of raising the profiles of the next gen, and it's doing amazing things. And I'm actually quite fortunate that I've managed to take quite a step back now, because the teams and the committees are so empowered and they're doing such incredible things. So I suppose that was driven by my passion for a more diverse, inclusive environment for even our next gen professionals, and how they're going to kind of evolve in the industry, and their views, and how we, when we've got 50% women coming into the industry, how do we retain 50% women, and kind of like, how do we get them on our committees? And most of our committee members are actually women, not through choice, just they're so empowered. And where do we lose that empowerment? Where do we lose that dedication? At what stage in the industry do they drop off? Because it's really unfortunate. So we've done a lot of work and research around that as well, and trying to help people like Changing the Face of Property, who have a very kind of keen diversity agenda, using our members to really try and dig into the real estate world and figure out what the problem is, from these enthusiastic women to a very disproportionate exec level in most businesses. So that's been really powerful. And then Project Utopia. So after Cushman & Wakefield, I left and I set up a business for a company called YOO. They're a design-led developer around the world. And I set up a business for them, and I loved what they stood for, because they were creating really interesting and well-designed spaces focused on lifestyle, but they were doing really nice houses for rich people. And there comes a point in your life when you go, I can't just keep building nice spaces for rich people. I need something that makes me feel good when I go to work. And whilst I love the ethos, I was like, I need something that I know I'm really supporting people with. And along came Project Utopia. I actually spoke on a panel with the CEO a couple of years ago, and I said, if anything comes up, let me know, because I'm really eager to kind of get involved. And last year he came up to me, he's like, right, I've created a role for you. I want you to be brand and strategic partnership director globally. And now I'm in charge of the brand and the marketing and the PR and the strategic partnerships for 5 businesses within group, with a small team underneath me, aligning all of their messages, because they all create the Utopia vision, which is building a more sustainable and affordable future so everybody can live in comfort, no matter what income level you're at. And we're building some of the most sustainable homes in the UK. We've got 110 out of 100 on our EPC rating recently, so we've kind of knocked it out of the park. And I get to deliver that incredible message around sustainability globally. So it's a really incredible place to be, and an incredible position to have at such a topical and step-changing kind of part of the industry, I suppose.
Amazing. Wow. So much to unpack there. I can't wait to dive into that as we move through the conversation, but kudos to you. I mean, that sounds like a lot of heart-driven, amazing work that's doing some really good things, and really creating some much needed solutions in the space. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Let's move on. Karen, would love to hear your experience with Furniture, and learn more about where you are in the space.
Yeah, for sure. So before I founded Furniture, I was a software developer, project manager for BlackBerry and TELUS. And I always knew that I loved the problem-solving aspect of the job, but I didn't love the problems that I was solving. It was telecommunication, infrastructure. It was a bit too boring for me. So, and I've always had a passion for interior design. And so I would work with other designers part-time in the city to learn about the industry. I would take courses about furniture making, and then having to furnish my own apartment after moving out on my own, I realized that this industry of interior design and furnishing just segmented, and every part of the supply chain, every part of the retail experience could use some technology to enable an easier experience. And that's really what inspired me to co-found Furniture in 2016 with my co-founder, Mike. And Furniture is a turnkey furnishing platform that will let you submit a design request to tell us what kind of space, what kind of empty space you have, what style preferences that you have. And we'll use the design recommendation engine to generate a few design packages that would include furniture and accessories that you can just choose and purchase. And at the end of it, we'll also come into your home and do the whole setup and home makeover in a day. And we're now active in more than 70 cities in North America. We started with furnishing residential homes, and we're now furnishing commercial spaces as well.
Amazing. And did I not just note this week that Furniture received some recognition?
Yes, yes. We were 31st. We ranked 31st in the Maclean's Canada's top growth list for Canadian startups in 2020.
Amazing. Well, congratulations to you and
Thank
Mike
you.
to that. Good on you guys. That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're in mute.
Sorry, I meant to hit the other button. I'm trying to scroll your faces across, so I actually feel like I'm talking to you. My apologies, and thank you for letting me know. Monica, would love to hear about Ratio City and what you guys are up to these days.
Sure. So nice chatting. So again, similar to Elizabeth, again, somebody told me 5 years ago even that I'd be the CEO of a tech company. I'd be like, what are you talking about? Because ever since I was a kid, I always just knew I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to grow up and build buildings, but I'd always had a fascination with cities. But I did have, a professional career here in the Toronto region. And I spent, the last 15 years being involved in, designing, planning, and then seeing, mid and high-rise buildings constructed throughout the city. However, I got remarkably frustrated with the process because you recognize that, yes, the information about cities is highly fragmented, very difficult to access. Even for professionals who spent their entire career doing this, it was just a pain. And so I like the theme of today's talk because, what kind of empire are we building? And I see what we're doing at Ratio City is like we're building a Google search engine for cities. We want to be able to answer any kind of question that you have about urban data. We want to put urban data at your fingertips so that professionals who need it to make better decisions about the quality of the cities that we all live in will be able to do that. And they can spend their time doing the really challenging dealing with those really challenging problems, not just looking up the zoning bylaw or where the nearest park is or which city councilor is in charge of this neighborhood. And so I started Ratio City about 3 years ago with a co-founder. And essentially our mission is to develop and deliver tools for urban transformation. And we're providing really easy to use visualization tools. So it's a web-based platform. You don't need any special GIS or BIM software. You can just log in, get all the information that you need, search through it, and then run 3D analysis really, really easily. Yeah, so that's been an adventure, and I'm looking forward to diving into some of the other issues that we started talking about.
Amazing. Well, I love that adventure. And I love that, I was asked earlier today, did you ever really know what you wanted to be when you as you evolved or as your career? Well, it's basically, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up? And my answer has always been no. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I'm always slightly envious, and I am a little bit blown away by people that have always known what they want to be. And I think, being an architect is very cool because that gives you, sort of that baseline insight, right, in terms of how buildings are constructed, where you can then begin to layer on and why do we construct them and for what reasons. So I love that because I know that you have some thoughts around that as well. So thank you. And Maria, joining us from Buenos Aires, welcome. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to Elevator Ventures. Yeah,
absolutely. It's funny because when I was hearing Monica, and what she said, I'm also an architect, and you're saying like, I always wanted to be an architect. I didn't. And it's funny because when I started thinking, I wanted to be, I wasn't sure. Now everything makes sense. I haven't ever thought about it. I'm thinking it now. I was between astrophysics and the space and cinema. So I actually joined the two universities because, neither of them had like everything, right? I like design. I like very big scales. So, and design always felt very small. And the other thing, it was very hard. So then I joined architecture when I sort of tried to mix some things, and then something was missing, and that's something I find now that it's tech. So something is coming full circle right now. And so I'm trying to fast forward, and what I'm doing now, what we do in Elevator is, it's sort of a platform for us where we develop different products and services. Elevator is the brand, and our mission is to promote more livable cities and more meaningful and sustainable urban lifestyles, because we always orbit through the urban lifestyle and how we can make that better. And to do that, to enable that, what we do is we work in different scales also and in different business units. One is we started doing a building certification too, that it's called rental proof. And what we do is we enable buildings to switch between home mode and rental mode very seamlessly with IoT, with services, with voice app, and a lot of operations going behind. And it also, it's very interesting because it resonates with what Karen does, because it has flexible furniture and things that are very aligned with all of you, these great women that are here. So we started doing that, and then we realized that the whole industry needed some of the open-mindedness that we as a tech startup, at least here in Buenos Aires in Argentina, was lacking. Like, it's a very traditional industry. So we started helping other companies use technology as the way that we use it, in a lean way. So that led to another unit that it's called the Troop, and it's a service unit where we help growth stage companies in the build world lead digital transformations with a holistic approach. So that's our main business that we have. And then also we have a thought leadership area where we have a podcast, we develop articles, and we try to raise awareness, especially in these urban lifestyle new paradigms. So that's where we are at, and we don't know, maybe we have different products in the future. That's always changing for us.
Amazing. Wow. So, you know, there's just so many common threads that I just pulled out of this conversation, or out of that, your introductions, on top of the common threads that I had already thought we could weave all the way through the conversation. So, you know, before we even met, and so we had the opportunity to meet a few days ago and just really address the session. But, you know, some of the common themes that we talked about were the fact that, you know, in every one of your situations, where you have arrived to, or what you are doing currently, is really through in a data-driven environment. So you're taking information that's accessible and available and utilizing that to drive forward initiatives. However, it's all very people generated. And you know, Rosanna, you're the only person that I hadn't spoken to before, but that, I mean, obviously in your description, it is all about people generation, but for every one of you, it's really around how do you take information and really help people? And on top of that, how do you help people and connect them through space and environment and, you know, sort of that whole built world? And I loved some of the things, the other terms that I heard. I know, Monica, you talked a lot about urban transformation. Karen, you talked about, you know, really wanting to solve problems, but not loving but needing to love the problems that you're solving. Right. I think that's the other common theme that I heard woven throughout all of your introductions, is you all have landed in a place where your contributions are really personally self-aligned and self-driving you. And I think that's such an important component in this conversation around building empires and stop, regardless of, you know, who you are, right? So I'd like to kind of lean in there, and Monica, maybe toss the baton back to you. And so really, with some of these common themes in mind, I'm curious from your perspective, does this moment in time really provide an opportunity for women in particular to be more influential in the built environment? So, you know, knowing that women are, you know, we have access to all of this data, but women are typically heart-driven, people-driven. But we have this moment in time to really rethink how we are shaping that urban experience, the building experience. So from your perspective, you know, do we have some opportunities here? And more specifically, are there any examples that you can share with us?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really interesting time, because all of a sudden this is part of the discourse where, you know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this wasn't something that people talked about, and now it is, you know, and it's quite it's quite pervasive, not just in the building and like city building environment, but in the technology space as well. You know, when we were first starting the company, you know, that was, you know, 3-4 years ago, was when the funding metrics for women-led companies were coming out, and that like less than 1% of venture funding flowed to women-led founders. And so I turned to my founder, who's a male. I was like, dude, like we're gonna have to fix this if we're gonna make a go of it. But, you know, this idea of this discourse, you know, because all of a sudden, if there's a discourse, we can start measuring, and we can start measuring progress. And I think when we're talking about city building specifically, especially recently, and not just, you know, gender representation, but, you know, we're building cities for all sorts of people. And yes, 50% of people who are in cities are women. And the folks that are designing the spaces and making decisions about cities, you know, should be representative of that experience of the city. And then there's also, you know, yeah, bringing in economic diversity, not just people who have, you know, architecture degrees who went and studied for a number of years to be able to contribute to these conversations about space. And I think that technology can definitely help in terms of providing collaboration opportunities. I mean, so one of the things that, you know, our platform does is, because it's a very intuitive 3-dimensional map, you don't need to have a background in knowing how to read an architectural site plan or a building elevation. You know, if you see a 3D building, you spin it around kind of like in a video game. If you ever played SimCity, it's kind of similar to that. And so if you think about how do you bring various stakeholders around, you know, a digital table, you know, this becomes interesting. And so how can you encourage technology in a really easy to access way, I think is really exciting, and a way to get additional voices around the table.
I love that. I think that's, you know, it's extremely astute in terms of, you know, kind of that intersection. Technology can be that great intersector, right? And that great connector in terms of really bringing all of those perspectives in. Before I move on, I'm just curious if anybody else wanted to lean in on this topic, because I think, you know, there's a natural progression to a question for Rosanna based on their experience with the Creativity Network. You know, and so really just thinking about this question around, you know, when it comes to cities and spaces and how that built world is evolving, right? And thinking back to, you know, how you and the work that you've done in the Creativity Network have provided opportunity for people who may not otherwise have been able to attend events, participate in things like this. And I mean, this moment in time, again, makes that a little bit easier and accessible, I think. But even without kind of this forced digitization, I'm curious to know if through that initiative or that work, if there are trends that we are seeing that, you know, promote or encourage more women to be participating in those things. So, you know, in your experience of supporting young leaders to attend events, engage in speaking opportunities, et cetera, you know, have you been seeing sort of more encouragement on maybe the women's side, but maybe just on diversity as well and participating in some of these events?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think absolutely. I think one thing as women, and obviously you guys can all correct me if you feel I'm wrong, and I'm happy for some interesting debate around this, but I do feel like sometimes as women we lack that confidence, because for so many years men have always kind of been at the forefront of kind of employment and driven and motivation, and we've only recently, over the last however many decades, finding our voices as women in the workplace. And therefore, I think what we're finding through Creation Property Network is by being able to support people at the beginning of their kind of career journey, encouraging them to take leadership roles as a committee member, perhaps with Creation, where they're liaising with like the head of HR at Knight Frank or the CEO of Cushman & Wakefield or whatever it might be, to arrange events, to get speakers, to find, we run a blog called Inspiring Individuals, to go out to these people and go, we think you're inspiring, come and write for us. It starts creating that confidence where they learn to speak up for themselves, and they learn, you know what, actually I have a very relevant voice in this industry. And we put them on panels, they have a very relevant voice in this industry. And when we took them to MIPIM UK, I think we ended up taking about 50 or 60, and we brought the average age down to like 30 something of the whole conference. And we were like, yes, because we just feel like where the same as with diversity with women, young people have just as much of a voice and just as much of an interesting kind of outlook on what we're designing, what we're developing. This is their future. from the cities that we build, from absolutely everything. They should absolutely be involved in all of these conversations, but they often get overlooked because they're inexperienced, or people have been doing it for a long time, or blah 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 blah. And it's all that crap that people throw at us all the time, which is completely untrue. And I think it's the same with any minorities. So we're absolutely seeing people get the confidence to kind of step up and, I suppose, be a bolder version of themselves through just learning that talking to a director or a CEO or whatever it might be is just like talking to another person. Pick up the phone and call them, they'll help you. And it's been really great for that, I suppose, which means I think when people are finding their voice more, they're more willing to get involved.
I think it's such a another great sort of observation on the space. And I think that's really what it is about, is people finding their voice, but having the platforms to share their voice, and also knowing that it's okay, right, to share your voice. And I think, again, thinking back to the previous panel that I participated on, one of the kind of themes that we circled around was this notion around conscious or unconscious bias, right? And the bias around, ought I to have a voice, or should I have a voice in this realm, right? Not should I have a voice, and stop, but do I have enough authority to speak out here? And so, it makes me wonder, and I'm curious from your perspective, Maria, because I mean, you could probably make this argument for any of us, but if I think about your role in particular with respect to venture, it's not a traditional role that women would hold, right? And yet you have founded Elevator. And so I'm curious, beyond your experience or through your experience in your journey, how are some of the ways that you have experienced, or you're seeing sort of women reshape those traditional ways of doing business, whether it's raising funds, acquiring other resources, or even just, conceptualizing through some of the projects that you're working on?
Well, thank you so much for that question, because I was trying containing to jump in, and I'm very excited to talk about this, because it's something that I only gain the awareness with experience. I was one of those people that I felt very equal till I started moving up in the professional ladder. And I started seeing that I wasn't treating at the top level the same way. And it's the same, one of the stats that you've been, that you stated at first, that there are a lot of women in the workforce, right? Like, we are professionals, we are studying and finishing university, but at the top level of leadership in organizations, we are very few, right? It's very disproportionate. And I think that the way that we are changing it, it's, of course, we are more empathetic. Some of us, we have different, as any, all diversity, we have different perspectives, right? So everyone has different things to bring to a table. But I think that the most important thing is to realize how important it is to serve as role models, to not have imposter syndrome, because it's something that a lot of women have. And that's the reason maybe that some of us, we don't think we are good enough to be at a panel or to found a company. Or so just by showing up, and like we are doing right now, and it's important, I think, for younger generations, or for people that can say like what Monica was saying the last time that we talked, that hey, if she could do it, I can do it. And I think that those things are very important, and to give the space to others to do it is key. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It completely makes sense to me. I'm curious, anybody else want to jump in on this? My apologies if I haven't been scanning the faces well enough to see if anybody else wants to jump in, but please feel free, ladies, if there's a point that you would like to either emphasize or a view that you want to share.
I just wanted to jump in on that, actually, because you're touching on the importance of role models, and how obviously women need women to feel like they're a part of something, to feel that they've got someone to look up to that they can align with. But I guess because we are quite few and far between in the industry compared to men, sometimes like this, I'm being completely honest, sometimes I do feel I want to help people, but sometimes I do feel a little bit exhausted by it, because there's not enough women for people to be looking up to, that so many women look up to a small amount of women. And whilst we love it, and I love to be a role model, and I love kind of helping people and stuff like that, I just feel like sometimes it's kind of I don't want to put a negative slant on it, but it is quite a lot, isn't it, for women in a role model position to be supporting so many, or being a role model to so many young people. And I just feel like we need to be like really pushing more women, more diverse women in front of people, not the same person on the panel every single time. When you watch a panel about, I don't know, smart buildings, and it's that one person from CBRE who's always there, or because that's quite an exhausting like position to hold. And I think actually as an industry, and there's a tool that we use called Women Talk Real Estate, and people can sign up to it and give their expertise, and people and event organizers can go on there and find someone. I think as an industry, we need to get better at finding more people to hold those positions, rather than just falling back on that person that you see regularly in the spotlight, because it narrows what people perceive their role models to actually be, when there are so many amazing women out there. But also for the people who are always selected to fit that into their diaries and to continue turning up and being that person because they want to help, can be quite exhausting too, if that makes sense, without any kind of negative slant on it whatsoever.
No, I think that's right on. A colleague of mine who's a CEO of a large real estate company was asked to speak at a conference and said, I'll do it if a woman speaks after me, because right then there wasn't any women on the agenda. And he's starting to do that more and more. And I think that's really challenges conferences to have women on the agenda, to have different types of women, to not have the token woman, as you're kind of saying, the same one they're used to seeing every time. And I think we all need to help kind of, lift up other women to say, oh, she's really great too. She can speak at this, or she can, you should watch what she's doing. We need to be better advocates for each other, because there are a lot of us out here. There aren't just a few token women who are taking the spotlight. So totally.
Well, and I love that. And I think it's a great segue, Elizabeth, because I did, as Rosanna was sharing her thoughts, I thought, this is the perfect place that I'd love Elizabeth to lean in based on your experience, through the research, right? Which kind of evidences, this whole notion around leadership and why more men are leaders than women. And, I think just, to put a bow on the speaking pieces and why we get those people to come back, as somebody that's organized events, there's also a bit of that, I hate to say it, but the star power component, right? So how do we make more women into those stars? And certainly, and I would say categorically that is both men and women, because you have those high powered speakers, those people that are just very dynamic and, bring a lot to the stage, and people love to listen to them. But you're right, after you go through the circuit, they become the same faces over and over again, right? And so how do we even encourage, and it's what, again, I love about the format that Drastic has put together. They've encouraged just, like, I know way fewer people at this event than I would at most events that I would attend. And I love it because it's giving me a lot of different perspective. I haven't heard or even met any from or heard or met any of you before. And I'm loving the varying, it's the way it's expanding my mind. And I think, that's another place that we need to look at, is people that are putting events on, what is the reason you're bringing people to the stage? Is it for that star power and to get more people to buy your tickets, or is it really to encourage that thought leadership? But I did want to lean back to you, Elizabeth, a little bit more around this in terms of why, your thoughts around why typically have we seen men, and what are some of those things that we could do to address some of that traditional, thinking around leadership?
Yeah, well, I think amazing question. And I think what's interesting about that statement is it's not men in general. It's not all of men. So when you come down to it, you get to a point where there's a very specific type of man that is extremely likely to succeed in companies. And I think we all know a couple of those things. And extroverts do very well within management teams. It's actually one of the things that we challenge when we design a space. We say, you can't have all extroverts in this decision team because you need to design for introverts as well. And so we actually have to bring different personality types within the decision team there. It's morning people. Morning people do really well in the workforce. Taller people do better. People with glasses. Congratulations, Monica. Yeah, I was actually told to darken my hair and wear glasses, and I would do better. But my skin tone can't pull it off. So what you gonna do? But there's this very small segment of the population that does incredibly well. And what's interesting is that when you look at innovation, there's some great research out of Harvard Business School. Ethan Bernstein does incredible stuff looking at how to make innovative teams work better together. When you look at personality types, that's also in there. When you mix people up, incredible things happen. So when you have two people who think alike, you'll likely have them agree on one idea. But when you have two people who don't think alike, you might come up with a lot of really innovative ideas. And I think that's where we need to move to, is looking at diversity as a competitive advantage. So having different types of people, different types of men, different types of women, different backgrounds, different countries, different religions, different ways of thinking, because it challenges the norm of the group and really comes up with great ideas. And we're actually designing spaces for different types of people on a very basic level, you know, introverts and extroverts. When you have deep thinking tasks versus more collaborative jobs, it's incredibly different spaces that you need, and you need those little cubbies where introverts can go and just hide and pretend that nobody sees them, which I love because I'm an introvert. But looking at using those classic male figures that we have, but using it with a lot of other tools in the toolbox. There's so many, not that I'm calling us tools, but there's a lot of other people who can get involved and shake things up a bit. Yeah.
Can I jump in and say something?
Sure, please do.
Yeah, I was just this morning came up with a research that said talks about this diversity paradigm, and said that companies with diversity staff perform 20% better because of that open-mindedness, of that richness. But there's also talking about those unconscious bias that we were talking at the beginning, and I think that has to do with those why all leaders are tall or things like that, right? That it's because we unconsciously we trust more some kind of people that are alike, that we resonate with, and sometimes those people, they're not like the definition of diversity, right? So maybe we lean towards our friends. I was just talking yesterday to a friend in construction, and he was putting up a panel, and he said, I just called all my friends. And of course, they were like guys at his same age. So I think that we need to be more conscious to when we gather teams, to when which people that we are and if we are not invited to some tables, I always say, like, I don't ask permission, right? I just or jump into the table or make my own table. But there are some things that are changing, and we need to be conscious about it. I don't know if you think this makes sense too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would love to see a panel with a bunch of different ages, and I know we're winding down, but I think it would be great to see someone really young in the industry and really old in the industry to just go at it and say what they think the future is and what we need to hold on to. And I would love to see more challenging panels, people who really don't agree. I don't know.
Agreed. I think one of the things that we lose sight of sometimes, as well as we talk about diversity, is, you know, there is this whole notion that we learn from our elders, right? And I mean, that's traditional, from, you know, as traditional as you can be. And yet we don't encourage that, I think, right? Because the very nature of evolution is that what you do tomorrow isn't what you did yesterday. And yet what you do today is absolutely dependent on what you learned from yesterday. And so that's, it's that inherent evolutionary conflict that I think we sometimes don't encourage either, because we're too focused on just bringing different perspectives as opposed to perspectives of different times. And so I love that notion as well, Elizabeth. I wanted to, bring Karen into the conversation because I know when we chatted, she had, first of all, Karen, you have a couple of congratulations in the event chat. So I want to make certain that we pass those along to you. But as you're building your company and obviously growing it, right? I know that you had very different perspective in terms of, becoming into a leadership role, and this whole notion around, well, do I have to build it, or is it just something that you work for and you don't sort of think about necessarily, you do what you're doing. But I'm curious in terms of this question around building a team and that notion around diversity, whether it's women or just diversity in general. How do you approach this as your company is growing and scaling?
So I think the fact that we have a female CTO and a male CEO in our company, I think that kind of sets the stage for all our new hires. We actually get a lot more female applicants across all jobs, not just STEM jobs, any kind of jobs. And I think that aligns with a lot of the things that Rosanna and Maria were saying about, people just need to see role models. So if they see that there's a woman at the top, then it just makes things so much easier. There's already an example there. So from my perspective, I think, if you're hiring, if you're growing, make sure if you don't have a female founder on the team, then make sure there are women, there are diversity in the executive level. And I think that you don't even need to I don't think you need to be super conscious about who you're hiring. I think naturally you get a lot more in your pipeline in terms of applicants.
Yeah, I love that. And so when you get more in your pipeline, is there an approach that you take in terms of, I guess, here's the question. Do you have a diversity framework or a rubric or something that you look at that makes certain that you include it? Or is it, I'm just curious about your approach, or is it once you have a pool, is it then just about the best person for the job? Because I think those are the two different questions that I've heard kind of woven through as well. Is on one hand, do we have enough women being contemplated and part of the conversation and part of the application pool? And secondly, if we do, are they being selected on an equal basis to men?
Yeah, so our approach is always, we have more than 60% of women in our company. So our hiring process is to involve as many people as possible in the company. So that would mean that we'll always have at least a woman in the hiring process. And because we get more female applicants in the pipeline, everybody just flows through and goes through the same process. There's really no bias in terms of gender. We do look at, and when we have our hiring process, we do ask you to do skill assessment. We ask you the same questions. We ask you to go through the same type of phone screening. So we prepare the structure ahead of time, even before we post a job out. So these are already set criteria that we want to look for. And then at the end of it, it's everybody who, if we already have a diverse pool coming through the hiring pipeline, I think it's just very natural that you will get diversity at every level that you're hiring for. Yeah.
Love that. I really, really like that. I think that's...
Yeah. Well, I was proud of myself for getting to 50-50, but if you got 60-40?
For the longest time, my co-founder Mike was the only man in our company.
Wow.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that I'm in the interior design industry, so.
That's great. That's really great. So we have just a few minutes to wrap up, and I would love to, I always love to end these things with a bit of a takeaway for the audience, because I think that's, it's the opportunity that we have being, with a captive audience, is being able to share some pieces of advice or some insight in terms of, how can we encourage others to continue the great work that all of you are doing in terms of building your empires and bringing more voices to the table. And I want to say just more voices, whether it's women's voices or those diverse, the voices of those diverse backgrounds as well. So Monica, your thoughts, what can we do? What are the things that folks like us that are in, I can't believe I just used the word folks, but people like us that are in these roles can do?
Yeah, no, and again, I do think that there's a responsibility to stand up in public, to have these, to be able to have this discourse. And again, I try to bring, you know, an authenticity to it. And again, I'll freely admit, you know, in my previous life, or you know, in my previous career, I would wait for somebody to give me a promotion, to invite me to the table. And yes, like Maria mentioned, at a certain point, you just got to build your own table. Like, and that nobody's going to give you permission for that, not to wait for somebody to tell you that you can do this, but you just have to start doing it and it'll be fine. And when you look at everybody else who's done it, they didn't know what they were doing either. So it's okay. I think just that mindset. Yeah.
And neither path is easy. There's no easy path here, because it's also not easy to stay and slowly get undervalued and deal with something that isn't challenging you enough. So might as well go hard and get something that you really want.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice from both of you. One of the long held principles I've had, and it comes from, you know, attending the School of Hard Knocks for a lot of years, is no one's coming. So, you know, no one's going to come and pick you up off the ground when you fall. No one's going to come and offer you the world on a silver platter, right? And so if nobody's coming, it really is incumbent on each of us to a certain degree, right? To be able to create your own table if they're not inviting you to it. And I love the way that you articulated that, Maria. Rosanna, any thoughts from you in terms of next steps?
I have a couple. I think the first one for me, and obviously there are diplomatic ways to do it, but if there's something that you don't like your company doing, especially for me, I'm in a smaller company, challenge it. So at the moment, we were talking about diversity inclusion, and I did not like that we didn't have a working group around diversity in the business. I challenged it at CEO level, and I was like, nope, we need to sort this out. We now have a diversity inclusion working group that kind of brings in people from quite low level of the business all the way up to C-suite, just because it's important to have that. And I didn't like the fact that we didn't, so I challenged that. The other thing is what other people can do, I think, is create spaces that allow people to feel comfortable to be their own selves, to challenge. If you are that male in a company, or if you are that leading female in the company, create the space for the people below you to feel empowered to step up into that space. That might be not cutting them off as soon as you don't like their idea, or not being too busy all the time to even listen to them. Like, create that space, because that's the only way people will grow. And then the final thing, and it's something that I've always done and I've sworn by, is always let the people who can help you know what your goals are, because if people don't know what your goals are, they will not know how to help you. So be vocal about what you want to achieve. Tell the CEO of another company, if you happen to be, I don't know, in the vicinity and you love their company, let them know, tell them you're interested in it. How do you get involved? Always be vocal, because if you're sat in the corner waiting, as we said, for somebody to give you a leg up, but they don't know what your leg up is, they're never going to give it to you. You're just going to be in that corner. So I think it's about, once again, finding that voice and kind of allowing people to understand what your goals are, so that they may be able to help you, because actually a lot of people do want to help, they just don't know how.
Yeah, and adding to that, you know, just add to that, because Rosanna brought up that how to make a space, how to make people feel comfortable. And I think, and touching on what you said about the confidence level between men and women as well, and I think a lot of women are just not as comfortable bragging or promoting themselves or their own accomplishment. I think one thing that we can do, if you don't like promoting yourself, then be the champion for someone else. I think we're very good at supporting others. We're very good at bragging about someone else's accomplishments. And so be that person. Then within your own close circle, you're creating that supportive culture. Then you're creating that comfort, and that's, I think that will help other women around you take that lead and feel that confidence and take the next opportunity.
I like that. So lean on that empathetic woman
Yeah.
kind of quality and still be that strong champion and example. I think that's great advice, Karen. Thank you. Maria, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that study that Elizabeth told us when we were in off about the surgeons, right? That I'm sorry if I don't explain it good, but it was like they studied surgeons and they asked them how they thought they performed. And Elizabeth was telling us that women performed better, but they thought, and they qualified them, they gave themselves a lower score because they thought they performed better. Whether men, they thought they did great and they actually performed worse. So I think that's very, and I see this a lot of times that women, because we are more insecure, we tend to be more perfectionist. And so we don't throw ourselves out there and we don't express our opinions, or we don't launch the projects, or we wait too long till we have everything perfect. So what I would, because, and that's like the imposter syndrome that most women we have, that we were talking before. And I think that's the key takeaway that I would say is like, know that when you're feeling like that, it's okay, and just do it anyway. Like, don't wait till you feel comfortable enough. Just learn to be uncomfortable with that fear and just do it anyway.
Because
You know
people
what,
actually
just on-
love it, right? I mean, how many times have we gone for something and thought, oh my God, this is so bold or brash, or maybe this doesn't work out. And 9 times out of 10, at least, people love somebody who's just gutsy and who goes for it and who really takes charge, especially from someone who's also warm and empathetic and going for that. So like, don't be scared to be that, to be bold. It's paid off every time for me.
And love
just
that.
on that, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day around comfort zones and how your comfort zones expand with you. So obviously something that was uncomfortable for you to do a year ago is now something that you do day by day, and it is quite comfortable. And then the next thing is kind of uncomfortable until you expand your comfort zone to include that as well. And I guess the key thing that we were discussing was, well, when you're expanding your comfort zone, as long as you have a good network of people around you to support you when you do have that rocky thing of, oh God, have I gone too far? Have I taken too much of a fast step? And then you've got those people that you can call and they're like, no, don't worry, like, you've got this, just do this, this, and this. As long as you've got a good network around you to support you as you step out your comfort zone and you feel unstable, then that's the only way we generally grow as people, isn't it? It's kind of living outside of our comfort zone. It's super important.
I think that's, that's an amazing way to put a bow on this conversation, Rosanna, because I think that's exactly the crux of it. I mean, every one of you at a critical moment have had to step out of your comfort zone. I know that's been the same for me, and I think that's the story that we hear a lot. And I think the reality is women have had a lot smaller bubble for a long time, right? And so we've had to be on those edges a lot more. And I think that would be, from my perspective, a really good parting message for any women that are listening to this panel today, anybody that is leading women or mentoring women. Make certain that you give them the space to be on the edge of that bubble. And like Rosanna said, be that really great safety net and that support network for them, whether they fall off the edge of the bubble or they break through it, one way or the other. I think that's an important place to be, is to make certain that we can support them to be there. So I want to just take a moment to thank all of you. You are all amazing. I am so grateful that we've had the opportunity to meet and to have this conversation. Kudos to all of you for the change that you're making and the impact that you are having in your world and on all of us. And the best to you for the rest of the conference, and the best to you for the rest of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynette.